Hi, I'm Charles from the Saddleback, and we're going to look at Chris King hub servicing. It's coming up that time of year where you want to get your hubs rolling nicely again. So let's pull this hub apart and make it fresh. First of all, we remove the undercap. This is quick release insert. Sometimes you device. I use my thumb. I'm going to remove the adjusting clamp. This will give us free up our axle. Now with the adjusting clamp off, you can push the axle all the way through the hub. And then we're left with the bearing on the axle, and you can see the bearings inside the hub, free hub body, and these can be separated just by pulling them apart. You can see the helix on the drive shell and the drive system inside the hub shell. As you can see with these, they're really dirty, so it is due a service. A bit of paper. Pop these parts on, so it will need to be washed. Inside the drive shell, we've got drive shell O-ring, drive shell spring. You've got a drive shell with the bearing inside. So that's everything you can pull apart by hand. So separate the bearing, I just have to tap it a little bit carefully with a vise, making sure you don't separate the bearing, but sit it in a race nicely on the vise flat, and then gently tap it and it'll slide off nicely. Normally you can do this by hand, but this is an earlier model which is slightly tighter fitting axle. You can tell with a single groove in the end there. Set that aside, ready to be cleaned. Now that's your access to a simple service. So this is, you've got access to all of the bearing surfaces without needing to use any tools. So if I clean this up a little, you'll be able to see snap ring. There we go, snap ring in the bearing. So all the Chris King bearings, barring the one stuck inside the drive shell, have a seal and a snap ring. You can now get to all of these. So without any specific tools, barring a 2.5mm Allen key and the old pick, you can get to all the bearings, you can flush them out and service them. So from this point, with everything stripped out, you can see all of the bearings, nice and easily, on either side of the hub shell. On almost all the bearings, there is a seal and a snap ring, barring the inside of the drive shell, because that's sealed up by the other bearing on top. To perform a simple service, you can simply remove this snap ring and the seal and flush it out. We have all of the tools you need, which is the Chris King service toolkit. We've also got a new seal and snap ring kit here that we can put in our fresh bearings. So now we have our hub partially stripped, we can now use a tool to get access to all of the bearings so we can easily service them. A full strip down and clean. So first of all, we're going to draw the bearing out of the drive shell. With this, you need small bearing, split piece, and small cane. There you go. Slide drive shell over and sit the split ring, which splits apart, and this is tightened, right behind the bearing. And now we're going to draw the drive shell bearing out of the drive shell. Tying it to the pot. There you go. There's a bearing. the drive shaft. There's a white seal. Again, a power to be cleaned. And there's an empty drive shaft. Also again, power to be cleaned. And now we can move on to the hub shell. So again, using the small split ring, we can tighten that up so it sits nicely behind the non-drive hub shell bearing. And then get the corresponding section to then clamp that bearing up against the tool, and then with a hammer until that bearing is completely withdrawn from the hub shell. And we can remove the tool path. And there we have the bearing. And behind every bearing there's a white seal, which you will keep to one side. All these bearings still have their snap ring and seals in, but we'll remove them in a bit. Now as we're moving to a larger bearing diameter, we need to change the split ring size. So we're going from a small to a medium sized split ring. Assembling into the tool, and then we're sliding it behind the whole drive system to draw that whole drive out. With crisking, if a tool piece doesn't fit, it's the wrong one, basically, and you can't really go wrong with what tool you select. Because if it fits, it's the correct piece. And then again. And that was quite stubborn, but there we have the bearing, the driven ring, the drive spring, and the spring capture plate, all removed in one unit. And then we've got the whole hub shell there, complete stripped of all of its parts. And now we can remove that with the tool. Okay, and there we have the whole hub stripped of all of its parts. We've got the drive system here. This is all going to be washed. That's the spring capture plate. We've got a drive spring that can go into wash. We've got a drive ring that slides onto the drive shell when it's inserted, and that can be washed. We've got a driven ring that can also be washed. We've got the white seal behind, we'll put that to one side, and then we've got the large hub shell bearing. These, you can see, are really quite dirty, so it's about time they had a good service. Now to get to the seal and snap ring, you just need to wipe that bit of dirt off so you can easily get to the cutter. Really dirty. Give that. So why? There we go. And now in order to remove the snap ring, we use a Stanley blade. Press it in, so lift that snap ring out. There we go. And under that snap ring, there's a seal, which you can also remove, and that shows the bearing there. And then you can see the full bearing, nice and easy. It's ready to wash, and we repeat that with the outer drive shell bearing and the non-drive hub shell bearing. Okay, so let's start washing things. Okay, now we've got the hub all clean, it's time to reassemble. With Chris King hubs, you can get yourself a seal and snap ring kit. This is everything you need to replace seals which have failed, which have allowed dirt into your hub. You get fresh new seals and new snap rings. And now it's just a matter of piecing everything back together. So let's start with the O-rings. You slide over nicely. Second O-ring. Again, make sure it's not twisted. That's your axle ready to assemble. Let's do the drive shaft. So the drive shaft has an O-ring. That's on all nicely and not twisted, which it is. Drive shaft ready. And for the quick release insert, this one doesn't come with an O-ring, so you can just reuse the old one. The O-ring is only to keep the quick release insert inside the axle when you push it in, otherwise it falls out. So this isn't really protecting against any dirt, so you can reuse the old O-ring. First off, we've got a Chris King silver grease. Silver grease is made for faster rolling bearings, so you're looking at the bottom bracket and the hub bearings. With a headset, you use a blue grease that Chris King produced, and that's just a bit stickier, so it's for parts like your headset that doesn't really spin, just turns a little bit. So here we are with the silver grease. We go a third of the way around with the steel bearings. If they're ceramic, I tend to only do 8 to a quarter of the way around. Okay. There we go. And then just work that grease into the bearings. You don't want to fill the whole cavity up with grease because then the bearings will run really slow and it'll be quite sluggish. Instead, just leave a nice even coating on each of the balls. I'm happy with that. And now using a pick, we pop the seals into place. You just push down into their lip in the bearing, and then the snap ring goes on, and you just push that as well into the set. There you go. And I like to check that the snap ring's nicely seated in there, so it's not going to pop out. There you go. And then you've got your refreshed bearing. So now we're going to reassemble the hub. We start off with the drive shaft. We use a white seal behind every bearing it's going to be pressed in. Seat in there nicely. And then we get the dry shell bearing. You know it's a dry shell bearing because on it says dry shell B. That's the smaller of the dry shell bearings, and that sits on the inside. A little bit of grease in this. This one doesn't have a seal or a snap ring because it's sealed by the outer dry shell bearing and also the dry shell spring O-ring. We use our Chris King tool. Let's on the spacer. And press this bearing in using the correct bushing tool. With Chris King, if the insert of the bushing tool fits, you know you've got the right one. Sure. Nice and snug, back it off, turn a little bit, and go again, just to make sure it's really sunk in. And there's the bearing inside the dry shell already. Now we take the hub shell, use the non-drive side hub shell bearing, which we have here. We'll get one of these smaller white seals. And get the bearing ready. Now push this bearing into. I would just drive that bearing home. Just nice and snug. Go. Can just turn the tool to make sure that it fits nice and square. Our bearings in nicely. We're going to assemble the drive system into the hub shaft. Start off with a spring capture plate, and the spring, and the drive ring, and the driven ring. These go in dry because we add oil into the mechanism in a minute. And then we need the large hub shell bearing, which is a white seal behind it. There's a large hub shell bearing there. And then we carefully insert the tool. Squeeze it in. It's a bit firm, it's going in well. Chris, can you put a nice little hole in the hub so you can get an Allen key in there and get some leverage on it. There you go. This one's quite a tight fit. And now the two will reassemble nicely. Last but not least, just slide the axle bearing or the outer dry shell bearing onto the axle. There we go. And now we're going to put all these components back into the hub to reassemble the hub again. First of all, the drive shell assembly needs to go into the hub shell assembly. To do that, we apply the oil into the well inside the hub shell. Not too much, you don't want to fiddle up, but just enough so it comes up to the bottom of the bearing race. And then we can insert drive shell assembly. Give it a twist, make sure it engages, and I like to just give it a little tap from behind, make sure it's all together well. Perfect. Next up, we have the dry shell spring, which acts as a preload for the hub. We put the drive shell O-ring in, make sure that's seated nicely. And once that's assembled, we can put the axle all the way back in. It slides all the way through. That's at the other end. And to keep everything in place, we've got the adjusting clamp, which we screw on the side. Last but not least, we have the quick release insert. And now to set the preload, get a 5mm Allen key into the end of the axle, do 2.5mm, open the hole and just twist into the snug. A couple of times just so it's settled. You don't want to wrench it up, it's just preload onto the bearings. So when it's snug, back it off the tiniest bit and do up the adjusting clamp up. You don't want to wrench this down either, I'd say 1.5 Newton-meters, just finger tight. And there we are. Super smooth. Hub reassembly. Don't forget to like, subscribe and comment if you want to see any other informative videos like these on the Saddleback Cycling channel.